What are the forms of multilingual translation services? The Dubbing King software, a comprehensive audiovisual translation (AVT) software for Windows. The Dubbing King software caters for various audiovisual translation (AVT) modes. It is used for subtitling, translation, and the dubbing processes. Overview of the increasing demand for multilingual translation. Translation is one service that has been in very high demand in recent years thanks to the increase in globalized businesses. International traveling has also ballooned, be it for leisure or work. This only means that every other time there is a need for translation, and thus the reason there is an array of apps offering translation services or already translated phrases from different languages to other languages. There are a lot of different translations, and each one of them is unique in its own way and with its own process and specific requirements. If you are an international business, it would be beneficial to partner up with an experienced professional or a translation services company who can understand your specific requirements and accommodating them. On a broader spectrum, translation can be classified under two categories, namely business-related translation and non-business-related translations. Below, we will name and explain further the different translations that we have. What are some types of multilingual translation? 1. Website translations. What does website translation involve? These are general website translations. Any form of write-ups that one can find on a website will definitely be defined as website translations. It's very necessary to note that in such translations, one needs to change things like currencies, address formats, and layouts to appeal to the different local audiences. One needs to make sure that the documents to be translated would be as fluid as possible when translated to a certain language, and that's why it's important to identify the target language and how it might be received by the target audience and then localize it. Using a website translation management system to automate and ease the process if you have frequent updates to your website copy. 2. Literary translation. What does literary translation involve? Just like the name suggests, this translation is for literary works like stories, novels, plays, and poems. We consider a literal translation as the highest form of translation because it's really not a word-to-word translation, and there is a lot that goes into translating a story or a novel. Conveying the literal meaning and context of a literal work is expected from the original language to the target language. It involves incorporating the appropriate cultural nuances, translating humor, feelings, emotions, and other subtle elements of a particular work. Many literateurs believe that it is difficult, if not impossible, to translate works of literature, especially poetry. Some examples of situations that could be very difficult are rhyming words, puns, idioms, anagrams, and so on. More times than not, there are no direct expressions that could have the same meaning in two different languages, which makes translation for such hard. 3. Commercial translation. What does commercial translation involve? For this translation, it's very necessary for the translator to possess specific specialized skills and knowledge of the business jargon and the industry to which the business belongs to. The documents included in commercial translations include reports, tender documents, company accounts, business correspondence, memos, and many more. Most times, these commercial translations get mistaken for legal translations when a company handles a lot of legal paperwork. 4. Legal translation. What does legal translation involve? A lot of translators say that this is one of the hardest forms of translation, where they have to deal with birth certificate translations, marriage certificates translation, and also translations of entities, contracts, agreements, memorandums, treaties, will, and anything that may have any legal implications. A good professional translator needs to understand the various underlying contexts of the documents and that of the two regions or countries for which the documents are intended, the socio-cultural aspects, and the political-legal aspects. After identifying all these aspects, then they could translate the documents in a manner that makes it easier for the target audience to understand the translated version. To ensure that your translation is error-free and at par with the original text in legal translation, it is advisable to seek a second opinion on the same from legal professionals. 5. Script translation. What does script translation involve? Dubbing has really come of age in the film industry, and a lot of scripts need to be translated to be dubbed to other languages. When films are in the English language, they are usually dubbed into foreign languages to reach a much wider audience and have the film be enjoyed and watched across the globe. A good example is the Telugu language blockbuster from India, Bahubali, which was released in Chinese and German, among other languages. They also released the Harry Potter series into dozens of languages to reach a wider audience. You can tell by how far the audience reached because of how big Harry Potter the movie is. If you go to different parts of the world, you won't miss finding great fans of the film. You can say this is a literary translation, but it's not exactly the same. It can be very dicey, as translating punchlines, jokes, or catchphrases into another language to make the same impact is very difficult. With lots and lots of movies being dubbed to other languages, it's safe to say that this translation is very much in demand in the present day. 6. Technical translation. What does technical translation involve? As the name states, this is the translation for any technical document that needs to be translated. It can be user guides, manuals, online help text, instruction booklets, training materials and videos, marketing materials for technical fields like manufacturing, science, or engineering. These come in the ambit of technical translation. Where the translation of technical documents is needed, it's always important to incorporate formatting into either desktop formatting or DTP publishing. Using a content management system or CMS will help you keep the cost down. This is one of the translation services that need a very experienced translator to take care of. When in need of translation, you check that the translator you task with this job is well-versed in all the terminology that they might have to use when doing the translations. It's also advisable to provide a small training for them to verse themselves with the industry that you are in. As a translation service provider, it would be worth investing in an efficient TMS or translation management system. It can automate your project tasks and bring down your admin costs. Technical content translation is hard, and so any error or mistake may cause a bigger, complex mistake later on. Therefore, it is a good practice to check how stringent the quality control measures taken by the translation service provider are. Ideally, they should be ISO 9001:2015 and ISO 17100:2015 certified. 7. Administrative translations. What do administrative translations involve? Administration or administrative refers to the management of texts and documents in organizations, whether big or regional businesses. So administrative translations refer to the translation of these documents and texts. It might be confused with commercial translation, but it's really not the same thing. While administrative translation can be called a subset of commercial translation, all commercial translation is not necessarily administrative. 8. Medical document translation. What does medical document translation involve? When you think of medical-related files, the first thing you think of is patient files, but there are a lot of things that require translation in the medical field, and that's what we term as medical document translation. Documents like labels, packaging, instructions, or software and content that is product-related, like research papers, clinical trial paperwork, and quality management certificates. It is imperative that the translation service providers are experienced, have the requisite knowledge, and are in-country professionals. There being different rules and regulations that govern the medical industry in different countries, it really gets tricky for such translations, and that's why a translator or company specialized in medical documents would be the best bet for this job, as they would be familiar with the intricacies of all the different requirements. If you want the best translation service provider who follows a high level of quality control, like a company with an ISO 13485:2016 certification. The general certifications that signify quality, like ISO 9001:2015 and ISO 17100:2015 are a must-have.
9. Judicial Translation.
What does judicial translation involve? Many people would think, what's the difference between legal translations and judicial translations? It's great to note that these two are not the same and that they differ a lot. While legal translations are about translating legal documents, which could be ancient or from the past, judicial translations are the translations that deals with translating things like court documents like depositions, minutes of meetings, expert testimonies, witness testimonies, judgments, letter rogatory, interviews, and more, which are activities related to cases. Conclusion. To conclude, I have mentioned just but a few types of translations, but there are very many others I could not touch on, like financial document translations, software localization, and multimedia localization translations, which you can search and read up on. It's good to note that every industry has its go-to translators when in need of translation services, and that not all translators can offer all the different translations. Written by Winnie Mora Baiso.